Good morning and welcome to Mission Alive. I'm Brother Greg McCann and I'm introducing the second part of a series relating to the MSC involvement in China. As I explained before, we had the time in China to be a time of great development, particularly in Fuzhou. Fuzhou was, as I said, one of the last places to be developed as a punishment for harbouring Chiang Kai-shek. So that the time I was there was really from the initial rebuilding and right up to its present time, where they started with the fast trains, but that's another story. We'll come to that later. Let me continue now telling you about our time in Fuzhou. During this time in Fuzhou, I was joined by Father Greg McAnally from the Australian province. I was also joined by Father Chan from the Indonesian province. And the three of us worked together in Fuzhou. Father Chen spent a lot of time with the nuns and as chaplain to them. And Greg and I were teaching at the Anglo-Chinese college in Fuzhou. It was a wonderful time for the three of us to be there, and it certainly made me feel better to have some companions. During our time there, we were visited by Father Hans Quarkman, who at that time was the provincial of the Indonesian province, and of course he came especially to see Father Chen, but also to visit us and to see what we're doing, see what we're up to. It was wonderful to have him there, and it was just great to have visitors actually. Then after some time, Father Michael Curran, the Superior General, he arrived. And that was an honour and a blessing, and Michael was a wonderful guest, and he was so encouraging, and it was it's great to see him, and we both really appreciated his time with us. So let me just take the next step and say in 2004 through ITESH. Don't forget ITESH, I said, was the Columban Initiative, meaning for the Association of the International Teaching and Curriculum Exchange. It's the acronym for getting teachers into China. I contacted them in Hong Kong and said, hey, I want to get close to Shenzhen. That's where the MSCs were. I want to go and see if I can get as close as I can to where the MSCs originally had their diocese. So they were wonderful, and they organised for me to go to a university, a medical university at Zunyi. And you'll see down here at the map where there's China, there's Guizhou province, and this is Guizhou province. There's Guiyang. Guiyang is the capital, and Zunyi is here, north of Guiyang. Now have a look, and you'll go over here to Tongren, and between Tongren and Yuping is Shenzhen. Shenzhen is about there. So eventually I got to Zunyi, and I found that it also was a wonderful place to be. I taught at the Zunyi Medical University for 4 years, and it was during this time that I was able to get a glimpse of the church in Shenzhen. So there's graduation day there of some of the students at Zunyi Medical University. They were wonderful students, and I still have a lot of contact with those students even today. Sorry. It wasn't easy to get to Shenzhen because it's so isolated, as I had mentioned in part one, surrounded by mountains, and it was quite dangerous actually, even in the car, quite dangerous. However, I managed to get to Shenzhen from Zunyi a few times, mainly because I managed to become friends with the bishop of Guiyang. Remember I said Guiyang was the capital of Guizhou province, and the whole system, the Catholic diocesan system, had changed after the government took over, the communist government took over, became the People's Republic of China, so that all of Guiyang was part of the Guizhou province, and so we had the diocese of Guizhou. The whole province was one diocese, so that Shenzhen was no longer an apostolic prefecture in its own right. It was now a part of the Guizhou diocese, centered in Guiyang, and under the umbrella of Bishop Paul Xiao. Paul Xiao was the bishop, lived in the capital city of Guiyang, and you'll see some photographs of him later on. I first visited Shenzhen Church in 2004. I took time off from the university with the excuse of visiting the hot springs for my health. Shenzhen, the word means hot water or hot springs. When I got there, the Mass was fairly traditional. There were no special surprises there. But there were many old people. But I could hear these beautiful voices during the Mass. Absolutely magnificent voices. I had heard the orphans. Now, there's an interesting story about that. If you look here now, you'll see there's the church. You might remember the church was used as a grain storage shed from 1952 to about 1967, 68. Behind the church here is the hotel, and that's where I used to stay. That's the Communist Party Hotel. Here is the presbytery, and here was where the convent used to be. And so the parishioners had continued the work of the early MSCs. I think this is extraordinary. The parish supported 5 orphans. And if you remember in the photographs of the part 1, I did introduce you to the sisters and the orphans back in 1935, 36. One of the first things they did was get an orphanage, especially for girls, because many girls were not wanted and were just left, and so they were picked up by the sisters and the priests and brothers, and they started this orphanage. Well, the parishioners had kept the orphanage going all these years, and you can tell the respect that they used to have for the MSCs, because when I took the photographs, you'll see them shortly, there in the background is a photograph of all the MSCs back in 1930s and 40s. They never ever forgot those MSCs. So the parish was supporting 5 orphans. But don't forget, let me tell you, Shenzhen was one of the poorest parts of China. It really was, and it still is. And by the time I got there, just as I arrived, I spoke to the parish priest. He didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell him who I was. I just was a foreigner visiting. And At that time, the parish were considering handing over the 5 orphans to the government because of lack of funds. They couldn't afford it. They'd run out of money. It's considered one of the poorest parts of China, as I said, and they just didn't have any money. But the Lord works in mysterious ways, and it was wonderful that I was able to get there just at that time.